Go back to the beginning, not to the briefing, not to CENTCOM's press release, to the moment. A cockpit, two pilots, the F-15E Strike Eagle climbing to combat altitude over a patch of sky that, until that instant, was considered operable. Not safe. No hostile airspace is safe. But operable. Manageable. The kind of mission that aircraft had flown hundreds of times. Over Iraq, over Syria, over Libya, and not once, not a single time, had it ever been intercepted by enemy air defenses. And then something changed. The missile warning system lit up. Electronic countermeasures went into active mode. And at some point within that engagement envelope, somewhere between detection, tracking, and impact, the F-15E was shot down. That sentence on its own is historic, because the F-15E Strike Eagle, since entering service in 1988, had never been destroyed by enemy fire in combat. Not once. Not over the Kuwaiti desert. Not over the fractured skies of post-invasion Iraq. Not during the bombing campaigns in Syria. Not in any of the missions conducted across more than 3 decades of continuous operations in the Middle East. 0 losses. That number, 0, was not merely a statistic. It was the backbone of a doctrine. It was the premise upon which Pentagon planners built strike packages, calculated operational risk, and projected force over one of the most volatile regions on the planet. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why that 0 was not proof of invulnerability. It was proof that Iran had not yet finished building the system needed to destroy it. That system is now complete, demonstrated. And what it does to every American operational plan in the Middle East is the story this video tells. To understand why this shootdown matters, you need to understand what the F-15E's undefeated record actually represented. It was not military bravado, it was doctrinal architecture. The F-15E is a twin-engine, dual-role fighter, air-to-air and air-to-ground. Since its operational introduction in 1988, it has participated in operations in Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya. More than 30 years of combat in contested airspace. Across all those theaters, against Iraqi, Syrian, and Libyan air defense systems, the F-15E was never successfully intercepted by an enemy surface-to-air missile system. That created a perception that became operationally loaded. That fourth-generation aircraft, operated with proper enemy defense suppression doctrine, remained viable in high-threat environments across the Middle East. Iraq, in 1991 and 2003, operated outdated Soviet air defense systems with limited command and control integration that was vulnerable to American electronic suppression missions. Syria, Libya, the same structural pattern. Adversaries with real air defense capability, but without the integrated long-range jamming-resistant architecture needed to engage an F-15E operating at combat altitude with electronic support. Iran was different, and for years, it had been systematically building that difference. The undefeated record was, in truth, a clock, counting down to the moment when the right adversary, with the right system, completed the architecture that would make the outcome inevitable. The clock hit 0. Let me show you exactly what was built. Because what Iran assembled over the course of a decade was not a conventional air defense system. It was a specific architectural response to American fourth-generation air power. Start in 2016. That year, after years of diplomatic pressure surrounding the nuclear deal negotiations, Russia delivered to Iran the S-300 system, one of the most sophisticated long-range surface-to-air missile systems in the Russian exportable arsenal. You need to understand what that system represents in terms of real capability. The S-300 has an engagement range of approximately 200 kilometers and an altitude ceiling exceeding 27 kilometers. It was specifically designed to engage high-performance aircraft at operational combat altitude, including platforms with low radar cross-section characteristics. It is not a system meant to shoot down helicopters or low-altitude surveillance drones. It is a system designed to destroy fourth-generation fighters operating exactly the way the F-15E operated. The delivery of the S-300 was treated, at the time, as a diplomatically charged event, a friction point between Washington and Moscow. It was the first brick. In 2019, two events changed the calculus irreversibly. The first, Iran announced the operationalization of the Bavar 373. Its domestically developed long-range surface-to-air missile system, declared a functional equivalent to the S-300. Declared engagement range of 200 kilometers. Altitude ceiling of 27 kilometers. The Bavar 373 was developed because Iran needed doctrinal sovereignty, a system that did not depend on Russian parts, that could not be degraded by diplomatic pressure from Moscow, and that could be produced and maintained entirely within Iranian industrial capacity. With the Bavar 373, Iran gained strategic redundancy in the long-range layer. Two independent systems of different origins covering the same engagement envelope. The second event was more immediate and more revealing for American planners. In June 2019, an American RQ-4 Global Hawk reconnaissance drone, flying at an altitude of approximately 18,000 meters, estimated at 35 kilometers from Iranian territory, was shot down by the F-15E system, an Iranian-developed medium-range air defense platform. Iran detected, tracked, and destroyed one of the most sophisticated surveillance platforms in the American inventory. This was not a symbolic victory. This was intercept credibility demonstrated for the first time under real operational conditions, against a real American platform. Now watch what happened in the years that followed. The IRGC Aerospace Force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps division responsible for strategic air defense, spent that time building something no single system provides. A layered integrated network with distributed command and control architecture, long range, with the S-300 and the Bavar 373 covering the outer envelope. The airspace adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz, the western border with Iraq, the Persian Gulf. Medium range, with the Khordad 15 and variants filling the tactical coverage gaps between long-range batteries. Short range, with portable systems and autocannons covering the low-altitude envelope. Each layer was designed to complement the others. No gap left uncovered. This is not improvisation. This is engineering. But the critical innovation was not the hardware. It was the integration capability. Radar networks shared between independent batteries, encrypted communications, and, critically, the ability to operate in low-emission mode. This means a radar can track an aircraft without that aircraft knowing it is being tracked. The trap is set in silence. This is what anti-access and area denial, A2 Anno Domini, means in practice. Not a visible barrier. A zone where the cost of entry increases progressively in a calculated manner until it becomes unacceptable. Sit down. Because what comes next is not combat analysis. It is the anatomy of a calculated ambush. Iran did not get lucky. Iran executed a doctrine. Let me show you how an ambush of this kind works architecturally, step by step. The F-15E is a fourth-generation aircraft. This means it has a radar cross-section, the signature it projects to an enemy radar, that is measurable and non-negligible. American stealth fighters, the F-22 and the F-35, have cross-sections orders of magnitude smaller. The F-15E, by contrast, is detectable by any modern long-range radar system at significant operational distances. Against a system with a tracking range that can exceed 200 kilometers, the F-15E enters the detection envelope long before it reaches any attack position. This is where Iranian engagement doctrine becomes the central element of the equation. A modern SAM system has two fundamental modes of operation. In active mode, the illumination radar transmits continuously, which allows the target aircraft to detect the transmission via its radar warning systems, identify the threat, and take evasive action or trigger electronic countermeasures. This is the conventional engagement model. It is the model for which American fighter countermeasures are primarily trained. In low-emission mode, the system uses separate external radars, passive surveillance networks, sensors distributed across different frequencies, to track the target without directly illuminating it with the missile guidance radar. Active guidance is only triggered in the terminal phase of the engagement, when it is too late for effective evasion. The aircraft detects the threat only when the missile is already on its final trajectory. This is what transforms a lucky engagement into a kill architecture. The geometry amplifies the vulnerability. The F-15E on a long-range strike mission flies a high-altitude profile to maximize range and payload. At high altitude, against a long-range system, the intercept envelope expands dramatically. The missile has more flight time, less need for extreme maneuvering, and the aircraft has fewer evasion options than it would at low altitude. The pilot's decision window, between warning detection and the moment of impact, is compressed to seconds. Add to that an operation without an adequate SED package, without dedicated suppression of enemy air defenses missions to neutralize the batteries before the strike sortie, and you have an aircraft operating in an environment where the threat remains functional, silent, and positioned. Not a lucky shot. A kill system, specifically designed to produce that outcome. Executed as planned. And now we arrive at the arithmetic. At this very moment, as you watch this video, there is an FA-18 Super Hornet pilot being briefed for a mission on some American aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. He is listening to the threat briefing, and the planners who designed that mission know what the F-15E Shootdown means for his risk envelope. That briefing is now different from what it was 90 days ago, because the saturation arithmetic has changed permanently. Start with the numbers that actually matter. The F-15E costs, depending on configuration and modernization, between $87 and $100 million per unit. A Bavar 373 system interceptor, based on comparable estimates for equivalent systems, operates in the range of $1 to $3 million. To destroy an aircraft worth $87 to $100 million, Iran spends between $1 and $3 million. That is the exchange rate. 30 to 1, 50 to 1. The defender wins that math overwhelmingly. Now scale that to the size of the American force in theater. In any typical CENTCOM rotation, there are between 250 and 300 aircraft in the Middle East theater. Of those, a significant fraction are fourth-generation platforms, F-15E, F-16, FA-18, non-stealth aircraft, aircraft with a detectable radar cross-section, aircraft that share exactly the same vulnerability profile as the downed F-15E. Only fifth-generation platforms, the F-35 and F-22, operate in a fundamentally different risk regime against systems like the Bavar 373. And those assets are a minority in theater. The 2019 precedent established intercept credibility against an unmanned reconnaissance drone. The F-15E Shootdown establishes something of an entirely different order of magnitude. Demonstrated intercept credibility against a crewed fighter with active electronic countermeasures, flown by pilots trained to survive in contested airspace. But here, the story stops being about air defense and begins to be about force economics, about who can sustain the operational cost longer. Iran doesn't need to shoot down every aircraft. It needs to make the operational cost of flying over its territory or near the Strait of Hormuz too high to sustain routinely. And the Strait of Hormuz is the point where that arithmetic meets the global economy. A fifth of the world's oil transits through a corridor just 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. If Iran's air defense network makes the airspace adjacent to that corridor progressively more hostile to American fourth-generation aircraft, the ability to project power over that region, including guaranteeing the security of tanker traffic, now operates under structurally different assumptions. The saturation arithmetic, applied to the most strategically vital corridor on the planet, is precisely the mechanism that A2 Anno Domini doctrine was designed to exploit. Not an absolute barrier. A cost equation that, compounded over time, reorganizes the calculus of power. Not a missile, not a drone, a demonstration. And that demonstration was sent to an audience far larger than CENTCOM. We are no longer looking at just a tactical engagement. We are looking at what was communicated, and to whom. The first audience is the most obvious. America's regional allies, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates all depend, to varying degrees, on the American air umbrella. The presence of American aircraft in theater is not merely operational capability. It is commitment signaling, the tangible demonstration that the United States can project air power reliably. For Riyadh, which saw the 2019 Abqaiq refinery attacks demonstrate the vulnerability of its critical infrastructure to Iranian systems, the message is direct. The American shield has demonstrated gaps. For Israel, whose air operations over Syria and contingencies involving Iran depend on the ability to penetrate integrated air defenses, the Shootdown is a first-order piece of operational intelligence. What Iran did to an American F-15E, it can do to an Israeli F-16I. The vulnerability geometry is the same. For the United Arab Emirates, operating under the American umbrella less than 200 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz, the geographic proximity makes the calculus even more concrete and urgent. Any reconfiguration of American air posture in the Gulf directly affects the Emirati security equation. But the most strategically important audience is not in Riyadh, not in Tel Aviv, not in Abu Dhabi. It is in Moscow and in Beijing. Russia provided the technological foundation for this system. The S-300 PMU-2 delivered in 2016, the operational integration technical assistance that followed. From Russia's perspective, what just happened is a product demonstration under real combat conditions. A system of Russian origin contributed to the destruction of a fourth-generation American fighter. That carries immense signaling value for Russian air defense system clients around the world, and feeds the narrative that Western air power does not operate in an unconditionally permissive environment. China has a different reading, but one equally calculated. The Iran-China-Russia trilateral alignment, the strategic architecture of the new order this channel documents, has gained a concrete proof of concept. China is watching how the United States responds to an aircraft loss in a distant theater, how Congress reacts, how CENTCOM adjusts its posture, what institutional vulnerabilities emerge in the public response process. This is the dress rehearsal for what China needs to calculate in a Taiwan or South China Sea scenario. Analysts from the RAND Corporation and CSIS have documented the precedent effect that A2 Anno Domini innovations in the Middle East theater have on American military planning for the Pacific. What Iran has provided to the world is a real operational use case, real data, real combat, on the effectiveness of an integrated air defense network against American aircraft. Moscow and Beijing have access to that data, and they are analyzing it. This was not merely a shoot-down. It was a demonstration for a global audience. The question of what American allies and adversaries do with this information remains open for now. The answer begins to reveal itself when you understand what the shoot-down means for American operational doctrine. And that is what the next chapter of this story is about. Return to the question this video planted at the beginning. Not, which system shot down the F-15E, but, is this an isolated event or a systemic gap affecting the entire American Air Force in the region? The answer is, it is systemic, and the numbers prove it. American air dominance doctrine rests on three fundamental premises. The first premise, permissive or semi-permissive airspace. Before any large-scale air campaign, the United States conducts CD missions, suppression of enemy air defenses, and DEAD, destruction of enemy air defenses, to neutralize anti-aircraft systems and open corridors for attack aircraft. That was the model in Iraq in 1991 and 2003. It worked because the Iraqi network was centralized, degradable, insufficiently redundant to withstand a massive and coordinated suppression effort. The Iranian network was built to be none of those things, geographically distributed, with system redundancy spanning the S-300 and the Bavar 373. With a C2 architecture that does not depend on a single command node. Suppressing that network would require a seed effort of scale, in number of specialized aircraft, in anti-radiation munitions, in preparatory campaign time, that American assets currently in theater cannot guarantee with sufficiency. The second premise, stealth as the solution for contested environments. The F-22 and the F-35 have radar cross-section characteristics that make them fundamentally harder to detect and engage. That is true, and it is not trivial. But the F-22 is present in CENTCOM in very limited numbers. And the F-35, while expanding its presence, still represents a minority of the fighter force deployed in the region. The majority of combat aircraft CENTCOM can put in the air in response to a crisis are fourth-generation aircraft, and those aircraft just had their vulnerability demonstrated. The third premise was the quietest and the most loaded. The premise that the adversary possessed no real intercept credibility against manned American platforms under combat conditions. That premise has been destroyed. Now recall the Super Hornet pilot from the beginning of this section. His carrier is in the Persian Gulf. The Super Hornet is a fourth-generation aircraft. Its radar cross-section is not radically different from that of the F-15E. In an engagement with the Bavar 373 or the S-300 PMU-2, it operates under the same risk regime as the F-15E that was shot down. The entire battle group, with all the power projection it represents, now operates under a different risk premise regarding the airspace adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz. The carrier is no longer an unrestricted power projection platform over that theater. It is a conditioned platform, one that requires prior air defense suppression, dense electronic warfare support packages, and a sufficient number of fifth-generation assets to open corridors before any fourth-generation aircraft can operate at acceptable risk. Missions that were previously planned with assumed risk now require additional force. The operational cost of any campaign over or near Iran has risen, in assets, in crew risk, in planning complexity. This is not the story of one F-15E. This is the story of every non-stealthy aircraft in the theater. The petrodollar did not die in a boardroom. American air dominance did not die in an aerial duel. It died the moment Iran completed the architecture that made this shootdown possible. You began this video with a number: 0. 0 combat losses in over 3 decades. Now you know what that 0 was truly hiding. Not invulnerability, but the incompleteness of the system that was being built, layer by layer, to deny it. Irreversible here does not mean the F-15E can no longer fly. It means that the knowledge that the Iranian air defense network has demonstrated intercept credibility against manned American fourth-generation aircraft cannot be undone. That operational data now exists, permanently, and it rewrites every risk model, every mission package, every decision about which assets to deploy and under what threat conditions. Iran's decade-long investment in A2 Anno Domini was not passive defense. It was active preparation for the moment deterrence would cross from declared to demonstrated. Declared deterrence is when you say, "We have systems that can shoot down your aircraft." The world already knew that since 2016, since the delivery of the S-300, since 2019 with the shootdown of the RQ-4. Demonstrated deterrence is when you do it. When an F-15E with an undefeated 3-decade record is destroyed by a system you built, integrated, and operated. That is an order of magnitude different in signaling power, with no expiration date. And the dimension that connects all of this to broader geopolitics lies in the Strait of Hormuz, 1/5 of the world's oil, 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. If Iran's air defense network makes the airspace adjacent to that corridor progressively hostile to American fourth-generation aircraft, the very aircraft that form the backbone of the Gulf's protective force, then America's ability to guarantee freedom of navigation through that corridor now operates under new structural pressure. Not a hypothetical threat, a combat-demonstrated capability. The trilateral alignment produced this outcome. Russia provided the technological foundation. China provided economic resources and strategic partnership that sustained Iranian development through decades of sanctions. Iran built, integrated, and operated. What you are witnessing is not merely Iranian military capability. It is the product of strategic cooperation designed to demonstrate that American air power is contestable, costly, and finite. What has changed is not the existence of the risk. What has changed is operational certainty about its effectiveness. And within the structure of global power, that certainty is permanent. So what should you be monitoring in the coming weeks and months to understand how this story unfolds? Here are the concrete indicators. First, the American acquisition response. Watch whether CENTCOM announces an accelerated F-35 deployment to the theater. Any significant movement of fifth-generation assets to bases in the region, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, is a signal that American planners are responding to the vulnerability gap in structural terms, not merely declaratory ones. Second, positioning of specialized CD assets. If the United States moves EA-18G Growlers, the U.S. Navy's electronic warfare platform, into the theater in numbers above standard rotation levels, that indicates the Pentagon is building corridor opening capability in anticipation of operations that assume engagement with the integrated Iranian air defense network. Third, Iranian network expansion. Monitor open source intelligence, commercial satellite imagery, reports from organizations such as the Middlebury Institute for new deployments of Bavar 373 and S-300 batteries in forward positions, particularly along the western border with Iraq and in the access zones approaching the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran is expanding the geographic coverage of its network, the area denial envelope is actively growing. Fourth, doctrinal proliferation. Watch whether Iran-aligned forces, the Houthis in Yemen, pro-Iranian forces in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, begin to receive or attempt to acquire medium and long-range air defense systems equivalent to the Cordad 15. The shootdown of the F-15E proves, under real-world conditions, that the doctrine works. This creates a direct incentive to proliferate that same architecture to non-state actors operating under the Iranian strategic umbrella. Fifth, official American statements. If there is a public acknowledgement, from CENTCOM, from the Secretary of Defense in congressional testimony, that the vulnerability of fourth-generation platforms in the theater requires formal doctrinal review, that is the signal that the impact of this story has reached the level of policy and force programming. If the first three indicators are confirmed within the next 90 days, you will be witnessing the beginning of the complete redesign of American air posture in the Middle East, with implications running into tens of billions of dollars in procurement, force repositioning, and the redefinition of which missions are executable with currently deployed assets. Because the saturation arithmetic, the exchange rate, the doctrinal gap between the force CENTCOM has and the force required to suppress the Iranian air defense network, those numbers do not disappear with a statement. They only disappear with capability that is deployed, trained, and in position. And Iran, meanwhile, already knows the system works. Keep watching, stay informed, because this story is far from over. Check out the video on screen now, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.